Okay, this is going to be the final reading of Romanism, Its Aims and Tendencies by L.W. Granger, 1854. Picking up on page 50. Having thus shown the reasons why this American association was formed, and the results to accrue therefrom, we are left to the conclusion that it will be the result of much good in the end. The great alarming evil of foreign influence must be eradicated. Something must be done on the part of our government to stem this current of influence so foreign to our free institutions. It matters but little in what shape or form it commences operations. To those who take hold of the matter in earnest, we say, Godspeed the work. The blessings which we enjoy are the fruits of American industry, perseverance, and toil. They form a component part of the government itself. Can we wonder, then, that Americans demand no interference in the affairs of their government? They have long enough submitted to the encroachments of foreign power, to constant aggression upon the elective franchise, to all manner of usurpations upon the government, communities, and individuals. They have borne it until forbearance has ceased to be a virtue. And for these innumerable grievances, they are now determined to be the executioners of their own laws. They have delegated their representatives in Congress with all power necessary to accomplish the object by amending the unnaturalized laws in order to protect the ballot box from gross fraud and injustice. But they have disregarded their mandate. The people have petitioned and petitioned in vain, but there is a party in this country, namely the self-styled Democratic Party, that has swarmed around them, opposing every measure calculated to effect a change in these laws in order to secure their votes. Grave senators, having assumed the proud prerogative of despots, taking all power from the people and investing it in their own hands, has become a great obstacle in the way of final success. Now then, let us look at the signs of the times. At the late election in the city of New Orleans, the question was whether Americans or foreigners are to rule this country, to make and execute laws. In debating the fact as to the nativity of the police force of New Orleans, it is stated on the authority of the official record that in the 1st District there are 2 Englishmen, 98 Irishmen, 25 Germans, 25 Americans. Police of the 2nd District, 20 Frenchmen, 27 Germans, 44 Irishmen, and 50 Americans. Police of the 3rd District, 2 Frenchmen, 4 Spaniards, 12 Irishmen, 13 Germans, and 26 Americans. Police of the 4th District, though not stated in detail, is estimated to be about 1/4 Americans. This is the newly appointed police, standing 470 foreigners to 116 Americans. What a beautiful state of affairs does this represent our country to be in? But a short time since in the city of Boston that the vindication of the freedom of speech, of discussions of any questions affecting or supposed to affect the political condition of the country, has been the occasion of riot and fight. The audacity with which the Irish Catholics especially contend for political power to be laid at the feet of the priests is exciting attention everywhere, and must give rise to the feelings and acts indicted by the memorable words of Washington during the gloomiest period of our revolutionary contest. Put none but Americans on guard at night. Naturalize, naturalize, is the never-ceasing cry of such papers as the Shepherd in the Valley, quote-unquote, in the West, and the Boston Pilot in the East. Standing in our midst, participating in all the blessings of this glorious country, whose foundations were laid by those who cemented them with their blood and tears, The cry is still like the horse leech. More, more. They would govern, not only themselves, but those who have hospitably given them shelter, and that too with an iron hand and by a sanguinary code. There is a word of significance in the call just now. The fact is, the pilot and its adherents, all who are tied down in slavery to the Romish Church and its various machinery, are in need of all the forces they can muster. Hence the cry of naturalize, naturalize, naturalize. No sooner do they arrive on our shores than their intentions are declared, their naturalization papers ingeniously drawn up, they dragged before the judge, where their oaths amount to little else than perjury, and in a few days become legal voters. Is there no corruption in all this? No, says the demagogue. Everything is fair in politics. And thus upon the same ground is this gross outrage upon the elective franchise accounted for, not only in every municipal but in all state and presidential elections. Fraud is stamped upon the ballot box. It is converted into a degraded and dangerous instrument. Are there Roman Catholic priests, these loathsome vagabonds, hypocritical and seductive daredevils, who not only pollute their already corrupt and accursed church, but also the most sacred institution within the gift of a free people, stationed at the ballot box to urge these foul and malicious conspirators to deposit their ballot? No, they tell them in the pulpit. Read over to them the list of candidates, and tell them upon the peril of being cast by them into purgatory, to go the whole ticket. On the day of the election, they swarm around the ballot box, and in ignorance of what they are doing, cast their suffrage for men of whom they know nothing and care less. They are made in the bands of political knaves and demagogues, tools for party purposes. In fact, in the heat of a political battle, what care the demagogue for the government or its sacred institutions? To them, the perpetuity of this government is no object if they can only fill the offices and fatten upon the soils. What interest do they take in the national honor and pride of their country? Their gaze is eagerly cast into the future, into the public crib, quote unquote. They are to remain in doubtful expectation of gaining the goal of their ambition. For the good of their government, they never entertain an honest principle for a moment, and their aspirations for success, like drowning men, they catch at every straw that a purchase may come in their way. Perchance might come in their way. To secure their election, they employ dishonorable means as agents to success, thereby rendering politics of little moment to men of honor and integrity. Our rulers are men of this same stamp. In fact, they are more corrupt when we consider the position they occupy. Every political movement is done by caucus, quote unquote, or by some pilot in the quote unquote secret chamber. It is here that the policy of courting, that's a word to mean sleeping with, or dating, or as it says in Revelation, fornicating with the kings of the earth. It is here that the policy of courting the Roman Catholic vote is called in question, whether it will prove politic to this or that political organization, fornicating with the kings of the earth. We believe, and always have, that such political movements on the part of a few men are dangerous to the institutions of a free republican government. It brings into the fields of warfare element of strife and discord. It undervalues the worth of our integrity as an American people, a people whom all nations honor with reverence as, quote unquote, the star in the east, to guide them in the paths of wisdom, intelligence, and virtue. How lamentable, then, that we as one people, compromising one great politic, should be subjected to so many influences, the tendency of which is to impair the noble structure of our government. We all feel them, all admit them to be stern and incontrovertible facts. If the mass of the people move forward to redress wrongs perpetrated or call loudly for reform in reference to any particular system calculated as a measure of reform, they are often repulsed in their efforts by those who term themselves party leaders. Is it to be supposed that any government should tolerate and protect what is essentially fatal to its own existence? When it guarantees the freedom of speech, does it mean to protect the traitor in preaching treason? Does it mean to protect the insurrectionist in exciting rebellion? Does it mean to guarantee every man so disposed to the right to advise and plot its own overthrow? Does it contemplate suicide? And of religious freedom, does it intend to afford protection to that religion which aims to subvert it and bring it down about a union of church and state? And to bring about a union of church and state? And indeed, that is what is foretold in Bible prophecy becomes of America, the image of the beast, the likeness of the Roman papacy, a church-state institution, Vatican City. The spiritual and temporal keys of the Pope. From Focus and Pepin. Does it intend to protect that religion which is the open and implacable enemy of all other creeds, sacred and profane, and only wants the power to crush all other human institutions and prohibit the freedom of speech and action and even thought? Does it intend to be so free and tolerant, quote unquote, as to permit the extermination of all freedom and toleration? Yeah, let's look up a quote here. Pope Pius IX, in his encyclical letter of August 15th, 1854, said, "The absurd and erroneous doctrines or ravings in defense of liberty of conscience are a most pestilential error, or a plague, or a virus, or a pandemic. Of all others, the most to be dreaded in a state." The same Pope, in his encyclical letter of December 8th, 1864, anathematized or condemned, quote, "those who assert the liberty of conscience and religious worship. Also, all such as maintain the Church may not employ force." So what this author is stating here is not bigoted. It is a fact that this is the doctrines of the Church of Rome. Continuing on. No government like ours could for a moment rationally be supposed to protect any religious or political creed or its followers and promulgators if the aim and action be inconsistent with republicanism. On the contrary, inasmuch as it is founded in rational liberty, it is its duty to discountenance and suppress any creed, sect, or party whose principles are at war with itself, that is, the government and the freedoms it protects, the natural right or duty of self-preservation, being just as applicable to nations or governments as to individuals. Hence, although our government may allow a residence here to individuals whose political or religious views are antagonistic to itself, it should never admit them to citizenship. It should never give them a voice in administration of public affairs, nor to allow them any privileges that are not allowed to citizens, or that would be likely to exert an influence inimical to the strength and permanency of our institutions. So it sounds like what he's saying is, sure, let them come live here, but don't allow them to be part of the government until they forsake the allegiance to these foreign powers and are willing to uphold the Constitution and the freedoms and not try to create a church-state union here. If they want anything inconsistent with the peace and welfare of the country, they should be compelled to go elsewhere for it. They would have no right to complain, as they have no right to demand that others shall make sacrifices or run risks for their benefit. And further, should any citizen become opposed to the principles of our government, either through a political or religious conviction, he at the same time becomes dangerous to our peace, prosperity, and permanency as a nation, to the extent of his influence and power. And it is his duty as an honest man, and it is the right of any or all true citizens to demand that he shall withdraw from the great confederacy, that he shall relinquish his citizenship, and yield up his political rights to become a mere resident in the country, or to join another consonance with his political and religious belief. The government is established for the benefit of the whole, and can be dissolved only by the consent of the whole, or because it fails to fulfill the objects for which it was designed, and for an individual or a faction to claim the right to make war upon it is to acknowledge the right of all to make war upon him or it, even to extermination, should they deem it for their safety. No man can claim exemption from political and moral responsibility on account of his religious belief. He cannot be allowed to do in the name of religion that which he would not be allowed to do by virtue of his political rights. Nor must he consider his religious duties paramount to his political duties, and therefore be willing to sacrifice his country for his religion. He has no business to be a member of a government the duties of which shall not be deemed more important than his religious duties, inasmuch as the former concern the whole and the latter only to the individual. Now, and of course, it is more important to obey God than our governments if the two are in conflict, but the Bible, Paul in his letter, I think it's 2 Timothy 3, where he talks about in the end times, perilous times shall come. One of the things he names is traitors, people that are disloyal to their country. And, God instituted the ethnos, or the nations, when he confounded the tongues or languages at Babel. So the nations are ordained of God to exist. And, obviously Israel was a nation. And so there are points to what he's saying, but the case could be made a little more succinctly, or should have been. But what shall we think of professors in Catholic colleges who assert their allegiance to this country in one breath, and in the next one boldly declare that should the Pope of Rome, as the Vicar of God, command them to fast a year, or anything else they would do, although it should cause the destruction of the Union? You will undoubtedly bear me witness that party discipline has already proved disastrous to this country and its institutions. It has defeated the greatest of statesmen and done honor to the least worthy of saplings. In consequence of such base ingratitude manifested on our part, we should naturally suppose that there was but little virtue and intelligence remaining in the people. Government is a civil institution, an institution which has its origin in the weakness of individuals and hath for its end the strength and security of all. And so long as the means of effecting this important end are thoroughly known and religiously attended to, government is one of the richest blessings to mankind and ought to be held in the highest veneration. Well, amen, because the Bible also calls sedition a sin, and it says that the powers that be are ordained of God to punish evil and reward good. It was this noble attachment to a free constitution which raised an ancient Rome from the smallest beginnings to the bright summit of happiness and glory to which she arrived. And it was the loss of this which plagued her from that summit into the black gulf of infamy and slavery. Because it was Octavius Caesar, I believe, that turned Rome from a republic into an empire. And of course, America today is no longer a constitutional democratic republic. It is an empire. New York is officially called the Empire State. It goes back to FDR. Proclamations 2039, 2040, Emergency Banking Relief Act, Trading with the Enemy Act, etc. It was this attachment which inspired her senators with wisdom. It was this which glowed in the breasts of her heroes. It was this which guarded her liberties and extended her dominions, gave peace at home, and commanded respect abroad. And when this decayed, her magistrates lost their reverence for justice and the laws, and denigrated into tyrants and oppressors. Her senators, and speaking of ancient Rome here, her senators, forgetful of their dignity and seduced by base corruption, betrayed their country. Her soldiers, regardless of their relation to the community, and urged only by the hopes of plunder and rapine, unfeelingly committed the most flagrant enormities, and hired to the trade of death with relentless fury, they perpetrated the most cruel murders, whereby the streets of imperial, or empire, Rome, were drenched with her noblest and best blood, because Rome was unconquerable. It decayed from within, from corruption, just like America. America would be incorruptible, or unconquerable by a standing army. But it's decaying from within. Thus, this empress of the world lost her dominions abroad, and she stands to this day the scorn and derision of nations, and a monument of this eternal truth, that public happiness depends on a virtuous and unshaken attachment to a free constitution. And the Roman Church, who wants to destroy America, knows that the only way that she can destroy it is by promoting immorality and crime, and so she does. Mafia, case in point. My countrymen, your Constitution, too, is founded upon free and benevolent principles. The keen discerning eye, the silvered locks of wisdom, the anxious brow and furrowed cheeks, as they gazed enraptured upon its wisdom and power, bespoke their hearty and cordial approbation. But alas, not unlike Rome have we fallen from our original purity. Not that our country is infested with the same evils and outrages that caused the destruction of that once noble and imperial city, although it is today. No, but we have other reasons for mourning over our bleeding country. We need not ask if any wretch has dared deface the image of his God. Has haughty France or cruel Spain sent forth her myrmidons, Myrmidons? Has the grim savage rushed again from the far distant wilderness? Or does some fiend, fierce from the depths of hell, with all the rancorous malice which the apostate damned can feel, twang her destructive bow and hurl her deadly arrows at our breast? No, none of these. It is the bloodhounds of Rome which inflicts the wound, who has encroached upon the rights and interests of our government, until she will soon hear the sound of the trump. The American archangel will peal forth in her ears. We spare upon condition you depart. An old familiar voice speaks to us from the tomb of Washington. the faltering tongue of hoary age calls on us to set our faces against the influences of Rome's decrees as manifest in the United States. He urges us on to maintain our rights or nobly perish in the generous struggle. The lisping infant raises its suppliant hands, imploring defense against the threatening storm. Your fathers look from their celestial seats with smiling approbation on their sons who boldly stand forth the cause of their country, but sternly frown upon the inhuman miscreant, miscrean, who, to secure, quote, loaves and fishes, unquote, to himself, would breed a serpent to destroy his children. Says Patrick Henry, I have but one lamp by which my feet can be guided, and that is the lamp of experience. Of course, that's sin to him, because it should be the lamp of God's word that the psalmist talked about, but anyways. We know of no manner of judging the future, but by the past. Well, and amen, but that should be secondary to God's word. In the farewell address of the father of this country, Washington, we find the following language, words that should forever burn within the bosom or the heart of every American citizen whose pulse beats high in the holy, H-O-L-Y, the holy or pure cause of patriotism. And here we quote Washington. Against the insidious wiles of foreign influence, I conjure you to believe me, fellow citizens, the jealousy of a free people ought to be constantly awake, since history and experience prove that foreign influence is one of the most baneful foes of a republican government. The great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is in extending our commercial relations to have with them as little connection as possible. Let's talk about Reagan reestablishing diplomatic relations with the papacy. Continuing on. Why quit our own to stand upon foreign ground? Why, by interweaving our destiny with that of any part of Europe, entangle our peace and prosperity with the toils of European ambition, rivalship, interest, humor, or caprice? Or why, what business have we spreading quote-unquote democracy in Iraq, Afghanistan, or anywhere else for that matter, Vietnam? Continuing on. To warn against the mischiefs of foreign intrigues, to guard against the impostures of pretended patriotism. Unquote. If such were the breathings of Washington in the infant days of this republic, when through his wisdom and intelligence he saw the danger approaching, like unto a newly discovered star in the constellation, what should be our position now, when the danger apprehended has become a bona fide reality? If it was treason then on the part of Americans to give aid and comfort to all the opposers of a free government, should it be considered any less criminal now? If when our venerable ancestors in their struggle for independence deemed all foreign influence conspiracy against the United States, then the more enlightened and intelligent condition of the people at the present day should cause every Roman Catholic bishop and priest in this country to who come upon us to usurp the powers of the general government and scatter the seeds of dissension through our institutions should hang between heaven and earth, a warning to their cohorts yet to come. Well, and just look at, for the first time in American history, I don't think there's a single Protestant on the Supreme Court anymore. There may be one or two Jews. All the rest are Roman Catholics. And up until recent history, they were all Protestants with no Roman Catholics. You fellow countrymen, they're the ones that interpret the law. Do you think that could be important? They're the ones that interpret the Constitution in a final judicial determination on a given matter, like whether vaccines should be mandatory and these sorts of things, and they've already passed Supreme Court cases indicating that they can be mandated. See the interview with the lawyer Dershowitz and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on the YouTube channel Valuetainment. You, fellow countrymen, who think that Romanists are capable of managing the affairs of this government, pause for a moment and consider the condition into which Ireland has been brought through the influence of her priesthood, and how she is still biting the dust, quote unquote, for her ignorance and superstition. Witness her, who for 5 centuries has bled, who to the present hour continues to bleed, under the yoke of her galling supremacy, whose miserable victims seem at length to have laid down, subdued and despairing, under the multiplied inflictions of priestly cruelty and rigor. In vain do her own best statesmen and patriots remonstrate against this great injustice. In vain put forth the annual efforts of their benevolence, their zeal, their eloquence. In vain touch every spring that interest, that humanity, that the maxims of everlasting justice can move to stay its force and mitigate the fate of Irishmen. They are their own persecuted adherents of the cross. She leaves no hope. Witness her subject, millions in the East, where in the language of the greatest of her surviving orators, sacrilege, massacre, perfidy pile up the somber pyramids of her renown. Such are the people, my country, with whom you have to contend. Ireland could and would seek for redress were she not continually oppressed by a hireling priesthood. Or were her people sufficiently enlightened in the forms of a good government? If her citizens do not possess the requisite qualifications toward the attainment of the object at home, how much less should we allow them to infringe upon the interests of the American people, dear to us in this country, far dearer than we can express? Who shall touch such a country and not fire the patriotism and unsheath the sword of us all? No, Americans, while you reserve your independent privilege of rendering at all times your suffrages as you please, let our proud foe be undeceived. With the miseries of Ireland, we as a government have nothing to do. As a people, we had fed and clothed her subjects when hungry and naked, freighted vessels with food, and sent them forth as the swift-winged messengers of our love and charity to stem the current of famine, which a few years since was hurrying many of her victims into eternity, while her priestly butchers silently gazed in solemn mockery not only upon the cross and its symbols, laughing at their calamity, but applying the donations to their own use. And I have an article on my website, contending.webs.com, COVID-19, what you're not being told and what other experts are saying, and I document in there that most of the pandemic aid money that was granted by the U.S. government went to the Roman Church, billions of dollars. The Roman papacy is the richest institution in the world. See Vatican Billions by the Knight of Malta Avro Manhattan. Specifically, Eric Bowman's reprint of it, where his introduction calculates the modern wealth and influence of the papacy, documents it. There's also, you can find like formidable websites like Forbes or New York Times or something stating that like today, if you do a Google search, that the wealth of the Roman Catholic Church is incalculable and that they're the biggest holders of real estate in the world. they could end world hunger and poverty today if they really wanted to. But do they? So why don't they? They have hurled it back into our teeth amid insults and gross outrages upon our institutions. But for all this, we have allowed them every privilege in this country guaranteed to American citizens under the Constitution. But having usurped that power and privilege, our sympathies must now cease. The American people have lighted their lamps. The last Roman Catholic has been put on guard. Detroit, like all of her sister cities, will show to the world that she will treat all foreigners who make this city their home with all the respect consistent with her laws and constitution, protect their homes and fireside in the honor of conflagration and danger. But as to their holding office, she will never consent. Their priests may demand it. They may urge on poor and ignorant Irishmen to insult our government, burn our churches, and destroy our schoolhouses. They can command them to knock down every American citizen they may meet and rob and murder them. But when Uncle Sam becomes aroused and begins to show his teeth, this hairy-scalped priesthood will wish they had never been born. They may continue to erect to service of infidelity their noble cathedrals, seminaries, and schoolhouses. Our civil liberties may still continue to grant them convent privileges under ground railways to inflict their willful depredations upon the people and subvert the high authority invested in government, and all under the sanction of religion. But as sure as there is a God in heaven, not all the powers of Rome's decrees will find no sacrifice, not even our own blood, esteemed too rich of a libation for the pulling down of her altars. Conclusion. Fellow countrymen, we have now conducted you through the foregoing pages to the end of our volume. Throughout the discussion of the various topics upon which it treats, it has been our constant aim and endeavor to present you a careful and accurate condition of public affairs agitating the country at the present time. Neither have they been more highly colored than the stubborn facts can call positive truths. As it is impossible to mistake public sentiment when communities are convulsed with excitement, so we have not shrunk from any responsibility resting upon us, wherein the truth has been called in question. At times, truth may be evaded, but it can never be dethroned. Truth, crushed to the earth, will rise again. The eternal years of God are hers, but error wounded, rise in pain, and dies amid its worshippers. Or, in other words, he is a freeman, whom the truth makes free, and all are slaves beside. If in our discussion of this subject we should be thought to have been guilty of any crime, it has only been in the suppression of many of those dark and horrible tragedies committed through the influence of Romanism, too appalling to be placed on record. The only defense which we have set up in the contest has been, quote, the sword of truth, unquote, without the slightest regard to the depth of the wound it may have inflicted. But in our efforts to strike a deadly blow against Romanism, how will we be met, not only by its enemies, but its friends? If the Roman press in this country, aided and backed up by the Pope and his lying priests, writhe beneath the sting of the lash, it will fall upon the ear as wailings of the damned from the depths of perdition. And why? Because they have aroused a sentiment in this country which already predicts their total annihilation. A sentiment that can never be lulled into sleep so long as Romanism has an existence among us. Already they see the handwriting on the wall, quote unquote, the precursor of their final doom. Their willful depredations upon this government for the past 20 years have been too enormous longer to bear endurance. They have been allowed to erect convents and monasteries in our midst, to carry on their black and blood-stained crimes, until the people in their might have fully resolved to tread upon the head of the serpent, breaking asunder bolts and bars, and holding up their vile and polluted clergy to the execration of the world. We have in the present work borne but a slight portion of the labor now before the people, but we feel the more encouraged to persevere unto the end, as we witness the grand demonstration around us. We have no aspirations for office or public honor. Our ambition is far above the shackles of office. It is to lift my bleeding country from the dust, to see her stand upon her own ground in times like these. We care not what the secular press may say against us. Their vindictive malice will fall harmless at our feet. Far better will it be for those who conduct the public political journals of the present day to go and wash themselves of their political filth, rather than to court or to get in bed with foreign votes and to subvert the interests of their party. And that's what the lobbyists are today that influence our government every election. Foreign votes to subvert the interests of the party. But there is, thank God, in this our day, a political press which cannot be bought or sold by bribery or corruption. A press that will stand by the truth, even be it at the cost of bitter sacrifice. That is the press which will vindicate the rights of the American government when assailed by a hireling priesthood. So yeah, people like me, we're protecting the rights of the American government, as it was originally founded, to exist when assailed by a hireling priesthood, backed up by all the machinations which even Rome herself can bring against it. Such a press will never swerve from the truth, let the consequences be what they may. The press is already doing much to expose the Church of Rome by knocking away its rotten foundations and exposing the daring outrages of its Jacobin desecrators of the Sabbath. Whoa. That's fascinating. Have to research that some more. Of course, the Jacobins were the ones behind the French Revolution. And we have every reason to believe that their efforts have been and will be sanctioned by every true American citizen. We cannot bring our subject to a close without devoting a little space to the quote-unquote know-nothing organization. We desire all of our readers to fully understand its object, that it is to advocate the immediate formation of a national American party. I will interject here that it's fascinating that this author, warning about how party faction has destroyed this country, would then go on to advocate a political party. But I digress. They stand on a broad platform. Their principles are strong, deep, firmly rooted. They come from the American head and the American heart. They go to strengthen, enlarge, and perpetuate American sentiments, institutions, laws, and society. I would add that political parties are the secular version or the civil government version of denominations in religion. The divisions that the Bible condemns. They are so great, glorious, mainly patriotic. Let us then, in our hope, strength, courage, form into a national organization and inscribe upon her banner in the letters of light and life, God and our country, America and republicanism. The following is our platform. We aim to Americanize America. And of course now, what's the talk today? Cultural enrichment. Total opposite. None but Native Americans to office. A pure American common school system. War to the hilt on Romanism. The advocacy of a sound, healthy, and safe nationality. hostility to all papal influences in whatever form and under whatever name, American institutions and American sentiments, more stringent and effective emigration laws, the amplest protection to Protestant interests, the doctrines of the Reverend Washington and his compatriots, eternal, and of course, revered, not reverend, eternal enmity to all attempts to carry out the principles of a foreign church or state, our country, our whole country, and nothing but our country, the breaking up of party intrigues, and with it the vast system of political knavery which has become so great a curse and bane to the country, American laws and American legislation, and death to all foreign influences, whether in high places or low. In short, the elevation, education, rights, and happiness of the people. Are not these glorious principles? Are they not far better than those of the other parties? It has been in its ranks the cream of the country. It has in its ranks the cream of the country. It is the party of equality, fraternity, and patriotism. And its heart throbs American and only American pulsations. Now is the time to act. Now, if you research Bill Cooper's, I think it's his program on Freemasonry in his Mystery Babylon series, now is the time was the code word in the French Revolution and in these peasant revolts, I think in England. And it's a totally Masonic phrase. So the fact that this phrase is used here, now is the time to act, makes me wary of this writer. So, for what that's worth. In your hands, American citizens, is committed not only the welfare of your country, but its sacred institutions. They were bequeathed to you by the glorious memories of the American Revolution. It becomes your duty, then, to cherish them as sacred ashes gathered in the urn, to guard them well from every invasion, at home or abroad, when calculated to impair their noble structure. In taking my leave of you, my countrymen, let me entreat you, by every tie that binds, cements together our happy union, to resist every encroachment made upon the institutions of your country by every kind of foreign influence, from whatever source it may emanate. Let American citizens rule in America. Keep it American. Follow the advice of the father of this country. In time of peace, prepare for war. Finis. Which is, I believe, Latin or Italian for the end.